Have you ever been so focused on your own world, your own deadlines, that you almost miss the moment that could change your life forever? That was exactly where Sebastian Hale found himself on a cold, rain-swept morning in Manhattan. The city had dressed itself in silver gray, glass towers blurred in the mist, streets glittered with puddles that mirrored the chaos of umbrellas shoving past each other. Raindrops hammered against the sleek black hood of Sebastian's Bentley, each one shattering like a tiny crystal on impact. He barely noticed. His mind was locked on the multi-million-dollar merger presentation he was flying to London to deliver. Every word, every pause, every hand gesture already rehearsed in the quiet theater of his mind. Sebastian was the kind of man who had mastered control: his time, his investments, his image. As the CEO of Hale International, one of the most influential financial firms in the country, emotions were a currency he rarely traded in. They were inefficient, unpredictable. And yet, as his car slowed to a red light, something in his peripheral vision snagged his attention and refused to let go. On the far corner, half hidden under the awning of a shuttered bakery, stood a young woman clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her coat, if you could call it that, was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. One arm wrapped around the bundle protectively, the other holding up a limp piece of cardboard that wavered in the rain. Even from this distance, Sebastian could make out the shaky black letters: "Please help. My baby needs food and shelter." Her hair was plastered to her face, droplets running down her pale cheeks and mingling with tears she wasn't even trying to hide. The baby whimpered softly, and she shifted her weight, bending her own body like a shield against the wind. Something inside Sebastian, something he'd locked away decades ago, shifted. Now I know what some people might be thinking. There are 100 beggars in New York. You can't save them all. And maybe that's true. But when you've spent years climbing a ladder so high you can't see the ground anymore, sometimes the universe throws you a rope back down. Whether you climb down or cut it loose, that's the choice. Sebastian's foot hovered over the gas pedal. The light was about to turn green. He could keep going. Pretend he hadn't seen her. Pretend he didn't feel this strange pressure in his chest. But in the split second before the light changed, he rolled down his tinted window. "Hey!" The woman looked up, startled, as if the voice had been meant for someone else. Her eyes were a shade of green that didn't belong in a city this cold and gray, deep, wild, and unguarded. She hesitated, tightening her hold on the baby. "Come here," Sebastian said, his voice even but softer than he expected it to be. She didn't move. Suspicion flickered across her features. Of course it did. Strangers in expensive cars don't usually mean safety to people like her. But the baby's thin cry broke through her caution, and she stepped forward. The door unlocked with a quiet click. "Get in," he told her. Her name, as he would learn minutes later, was Elara Quinn. The child's name was Lila. She slid into the back seat, clutching the baby so tightly Sebastian wondered if she'd ever let go. Her clothes smelled faintly of rain and the cold metallic tang of the street. The car's heater hummed to life, and a faint tremor ran through her as the warmth began to sink into her bones. Sebastian caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, her lips trembling, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. And yet, there was something unyielding in her posture, a pride that didn't belong to someone begging for change on a street corner. He knew better than to interrogate her now. Some truths come easier when they're not forced. He should have gone straight to the airport. That was the logical move. But logic had already failed him the moment he opened the door to a stranger. Without quite knowing why, he turned the Bentley away from the highway and toward the quiet, tree-lined avenue that led to his estate. When the mansion came into view, Alara's eyes widened. The sprawling glass facade caught the rain in shimmering sheets, the front lawn a perfect expanse of emerald despite the weather. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress of wealth, the kind of place you only see in magazines while waiting at a bus stop. Sebastian pulled up to the circular driveway and got out, walking around to open her door. She stepped onto the dry stone steps with caution, still holding Lila close. He reached into his pocket and produced a single silver key. It gleamed in the dim light. "You can stay here until I get back," he said simply. Her eyes searched his face for some hidden motive, some cruel twist waiting to reveal itself. Finding none, she reached out with trembling fingers and took the key. I, I don't know how to thank you, she murmured, voice thick with disbelief. No need to thank me, Sebastian replied, already turning back to his car. Just take care of her. And just like that, he was gone, swept back into the storm, leaving behind a stranger in his home. Elara stood in the grand entryway, her boots leaving small wet prints on the polished marble. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something warmer, like fresh bread, though she doubted anyone here had touched an oven in years. Every surface gleamed. Every piece of furniture looked like it had been chosen for an art catalog. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her. Finding a guest room upstairs, she set Lila down on the impossibly soft bed. The child's eyes widened, tiny hands curling into the plush blanket. Elara smiled, a real smile, the first in what felt like years. She couldn't remember the last time her daughter had been this safe, this warm. And here's where I have to pause and say, people underestimate what one night of safety can do for someone who's been living in survival mode. It's not just about shelter. It's about the way your mind loosens its grip on fear, just for a moment. In the kitchen, she found more food than she'd seen in weeks. Her hands hovered over the fridge handle like it might vanish if she touched it. Eggs, bread, fresh vegetables, luxuries she'd almost forgotten existed. She cooked slowly, deliberately, letting the scent of warm bread and sizzling eggs fill the space. Later in the marble-lined bathroom, she bathed Lila in water that was almost too warm, wrapping her in a robe so soft it felt unreal. Then, for the first time in months, she bathed herself. The heat soaked into her skin, loosening not just her muscles but the tension she'd carried for so long it had become part of her. When she finally lay beside Lila that night, the rain still tapping against the windows, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. She didn't know why a man like Sebastian Hale had given her this gift, but she knew one thing. No matter what happened next, she would remember this night for the rest of her life. What if the one place you built to keep the world out suddenly felt empty without the very people you never planned to let in? That question trailed Sebastian Hale back from JFK like fog clinging to a coat, even though he had every reason to be elsewhere. London, the merger, the speech he could deliver in his sleep. A last-minute schedule shuffle from the board delayed his flight until dawn. The driver offered to take him to a hotel near the airport, but Sebastian found himself saying, "Home," before he could explain to himself why. Maybe it was the rain easing to a soft percussion, or the way silence after a storm makes a city sound like it's holding its breath. Or maybe, let's be honest, it was the memory of a baby's knit cap, dark with rain, and a woman's eyes that held together bravery and fear, like two hands clasped too tightly not to ache. The mansion recognized him first the way big houses do, with small noises, heat whispering through vents, the lift of the gate's motor, floorboards releasing a sigh as if the structure were an old friend who still pretends indifference. He entered without turning on the foyer chandelier. The place didn't need spectacle tonight. Instead, guided by instinct more than habit, he followed a thread of sound that didn't belong to money or marble, a bubble of laughter, high and weightless, punctured by the softer music of a woman's hush. He stopped outside the first-floor guest suite, the door slightly ajar, a rectangle of warm light cut into the hallway's dim. Inside, Elara knelt on the carpet, hair still damp from a bath, an oversized white robe cinched at the waist like a borrowed cloud. Lila lay on a soft blanket, small hands exploring the stitched ear of a stuffed bear Sebastian barely remembered buying, much less keeping. Elara danced the bear side to side with exaggerated solemnity, then made it fall asleep, whispering a command for quiet with a smile so helplessly maternal it cracked something in him he had not known could be repaired. It's funny. I have seen men who buy oceans and still drown in a thimble of feeling. What I saw in that doorway was the kind of tide that turns ships around. "Don't stop on my account," he said, voice lower than he intended. Elara startled, then steadied. She didn't scramble to her feet or apologize for taking up space. She simply gathered Lila, pressed a kiss to the child's forehead, and looked over with a gaze that asked a fair question. "Is this still safe?" "It is," Sebastian said, as if answering aloud a thought she had not spoken. "You're welcome here." The words hung between them like a bridge finally lowered. He stepped inside, and Lila, incurious about wealth but fascinated by fingers, reached for his. Her grip was the tug of gravity, impossibly light, impossibly definite. He let her hold on. People talk about epiphanies like strobe lights. Most are dimmer. A lamp turned up one notch in a familiar room. Yet I swear this felt like both, the subtle and the blinding. "Do you need anything?" he asked. Elara shook her head with the reflex of someone who has trained herself not to need. "We're okay. I cooked a little. I hope that was all right." "I hope you ate a lot," he answered. This kitchen hasn't had a real reason to exist in years. The attempt at humor surprised him. It surprised her too because the corner of her mouth lifted, not in gratitude but recognition. People who have been cold can always spot the first hint of heat. They talked a little, the way strangers do when both are exhausted and pretending not to be. First names, nothing else. A map that shows roads but not the land around them. He did not ask what had pushed her into rain with an infant. She did not ask why a man like him had diverted his life to shelter a woman like her. Sometimes respect is built less on the questions we ask than the ones we refuse to. When Lila yawned, an entire flower folding to dusk, Elara murmured an apology that was more reflex than necessity. "You don't owe me apologies," Sebastian said. And even as he meant it, he felt the old vocabulary of debt and ledger recoil, confused. Not everything valuable can be balanced in a book. He should have left them then to sleep. He did. But sleep dodged him. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by a dark window in the kitchen, watching the garden drip itself back into color. The house felt different. No, not different. Honest. Wealth isn't a villain. Emptiness is. He had built rooms to prove he had arrived. He had never thought to ask who might want to arrive with him. Morning slipped in rosy and smug, as New York mornings tend to do after an all-night deluge, pretending the city didn't spend 12 hours drowning. Sebastian made coffee because he could. No assistance, no barista, no run to Madison Avenue. Elara appeared, careful on bare feet, Lila resting drowsily on her shoulder, cheeks flushed with the kind of deep sleep only safety buys. "Good morning," she said, soft, as if she were testing whether the day would answer back. "Hungry?" "We are," she admitted, with the quiet relief of surrendering one small battle. He scrambled eggs clumsily. She sliced fruit precisely. Lila held a spoon like a scepter and ruled over a kingdom of crumbs. Don't underestimate how sacred ordinary is to someone who has been denied it. At the table built for 12, the three of them sat on one side, the other chairs staring at them like unused lives. He found himself telling an absurd story about a failed sourdough starter during the pandemic. She laughed, not performatively, not politely. She laughed because for one shining minute, the absurd was allowed to exist again. Of course, reality rarely lets such minutes go unbilled. The gate camera pinged. Sebastian glanced at his phone out of habit and felt his temple tighten. A black SUV idled by the intercom. The woman stepping out did it like an entrance she knew the house had rehearsed for. Vivian Crown, silent film star name, 21st century hunger. Heiress to a luxury conglomerate that had never met a mirror it didn't worship. For a long time she had been the correct choice, and I say correct the way a board memo uses it. Efficient, aligned, photogenic. Love? That was a department both had quietly outsourced to ambition. "She doesn't know I'm here," Sebastian said to Elara, then realized how that sounded and corrected. "She doesn't need to be here at all." He told the system to grant entry because you don't teach a hurricane manners by locking the door. You teach yourself how to stand when the windows shake. Vivian walked in without waiting for a human to greet her. The house had done that already, hadn't it? She wore rain like a special effect, drops jeweled on a trench that had cost the same as someone's yearly rent. "Seb," she said, accepting the air kiss he did not offer, "I thought you'd be wheels up." Then she saw the high chair, the spoon, the crumb kingdom. She did not see a baby. She saw risk. "Who," she asked, "is staying in your house?" Sebastian had many options then. He chose the shortest. "Guess. Guess." Vivian rolled the word in her mouth like a foreign confection she'd already decided not to swallow. "Unvetted." He could have said what he wanted to say. People aren't acquisitions. He could have said what he should have said. My house, my decision. Instead, the old reflex clicked. Diplomatic and doomed. It's temporary. I've learned watching people that the most dangerous thing in a room is often not anger. It is the cold certainty of one person who believes they know what everyone else should be. Vivian followed the edge of sound down the hallway and found Elara in the guest room, soothing Lila with a hum so small the air had to bend to hear it. Hello, Vivian said in a tone that meant the opposite. I'm Vivian. And you are? Elara, she answered, spine straight, voice calm, as if pronouncing her own name could stake a flag in this unfamiliar country. This is Lila. Vivian's eyes performed a calculation fast enough to scorch. The thrift store shirt, the borrowed robe, the baby. She didn't ask what storm had blown them here. She asked the question money always asks when it's scared. What do you want? Safety, Elara said simply. You can tell a lot about a person by how they react to that word. Vivian smiled the way a glass smiles before it cuts you. Of course, she said, already turning. Of course. In the study, her voice changed keys. Sebastian, darling, I admire your generosity, but we are a brand. You are a brand. Do you really intend to house strangers with unclear backgrounds? What if she's unstable? What if she's a story waiting to happen? There are moments when even good men betray themselves by trying to be reasonable with the unreasonable. Sebastian tried to be reasonable. It's one night, he repeated, though even as he said it, the word felt shabby in his mouth. One night had become breakfast. Breakfast had become… what? He didn't know. He only knew the house felt right for the first time in years, and he was afraid of how much that mattered. Ask for proof, Vivian said. Ask for a plan. At least ask for answers. He found Elara by the window where rain still beaded along the panes like a poem refusing to finish itself. I need to understand a little more, he began. And I winced for him because sometimes the first words you choose betray the trust you are trying to keep. Elara's shoulders lifted then set. She had held a sign on a corner. She had held a child through nights when fear was a physical temperature. She would not hold her breath here for his comfort. I've told you what matters, she said, not unkindly. We needed help. You offered a key. And you have it, he said. You still have it. But the sentence had too much air around it. Even Lila heard the draft. I want to be fair about Sebastian. Doubt once planted by someone you've practiced trusting can germinate like a weed in a greenhouse. He was not suspicious by nature. He was obedient to fear in a way that had kept him rich and solitary. He asked a few more questions that weren't questions at all, just little tests people devised to satisfy someone else's anxiety. Elara did not cry. She did not plead. The opposite of begging is not pride, it is dignity. She gathered a small bag, tucked Lila into a sling, and placed the silver key on the entry table. The way you set down a borrowed book with gratitude and no footnote of debt. Thank you for last night, she said. It meant more than you know. Elara, he said, but did not add the words he needed, because admitting them in front of Vivian felt like choosing a future he hadn't rehearsed. And so Elara walked out into a city that was already pretending it hadn't rained, and Vivian watched the door close with a satisfaction so quiet it might have been mistaken for relief. The house grieved. I know you'll say houses don't grieve. Fine. Then I grieved for the house. The afternoon sagged. The coffee turned bitter in its pot. In the nursery-sized guest suite, the bear lay on its back with its stitched ear bent, as if it had been listening and now refused to. Sebastian tried to return to the documents for London. The word swam, then sulked. Every margin note looked like a question mark about the wrong subject. It took him until sunset to admit it to himself. He had allowed fear that wasn't his to evict someone who had done nothing but accept a kindness he offered. Night drew its curtain. He fired off a terse message to his security chief, not because Elara was a threat, but because his remorse needed information to redeem itself. Find Ms. Quinn if you can. Make sure she's safe. He didn't say the rest. Make sure I'm not the man who only opens a door to be seen closing it. The report arrived 3 days later like a confession he hadn't earned. No priors, no scams. A transcript that glowed. Pre-med at CUNY, science essays circled in ink by professors who used words like brilliant and precise. Until the semester the bottom dropped out of her life. Parents gone in a car accident. Scholarship jeopardized by grief and sudden expense. A boyfriend who liked the word forever until it meant money and responsibility. A bank account discreetly bled. An apartment lost for being 2 checks behind instead of 1. She had worked when she could, slept where she could, carried a child through a city that can cradle or crush, and sometimes does both in the same day. Sebastian read it twice because the first time pride tried to edit the most damning line. She told you what mattered, and it was the truth. When he reached the paragraph about Lila's birth at a community clinic, where the nurse noted Elara's remarkable calm and competence even in distress, he stopped, closed his eyes, and put the report on the desk like it had burned him. There are wounds that scab into wisdom only when you admit you gave them to yourself. He called Vivian. "We're done," he said. "No speech, no spreadsheets of reasons. This is not what I want for my life." "What feelings?" she returned, incredulous and a little amused, as if he'd announced he was joining a circus. "Sebastian, no. Don't throw your judgment away for optics." "I'm throwing nothing away," he said, gentler than she deserved. "I'm picking something up." He ended the call. Sometimes the adult thing is not to negotiate, it is to choose, which left the only choice that mattered. He took the city like a pilgrim takes a road, deliberately and without the cover of pride. The address security had traced wasn't a trapdoor to despair. It was a walk-up in Harlem where a handwritten sign taped to a brick pillar read, "Room for mother and child. Pay what you can." He buzzed. The door opened on a woman with silver hair braided down her back, and the kind of eyes that have outlived grief without forgetting it. "You must be the man who regrets things," she said, not unkindly. "Third floor." She was making soup. On the stairs he realized his heart was loud. Not dramatic movie loud, just aware you're alive loud. He knocked. Inside, the clink of a spoon, a small voice humming nonsense words, the low, calm cadence of a woman telling a child the world is not always a storm. Elara opened the door. She looked surprised, then unreadable, and who could blame her? Lila's face brightened with the unjaded recognition only toddlers manage, the way day recognizes dawn. "Uncle Seb," she declared as if drafting a treaty. "Elara," he began, "and if you're expecting a perfect speech, forgive me. Mostly honesty is shorter. I was wrong. I let someone else's fear make me doubt you. I'm sorry." "It is," he admitted, "but control hasn't made me happy." "You did. She did." He nodded toward Lila, who was busy tucking her stuffed bear into a blanket on the couch. "When you left, it wasn't my house that felt empty. It was me." There was no grand cinematic pause, no swelling music. Just the quiet of 2 people standing at the edge of a choice that could change everything. Elara took a deep breath. "If we try again, we do it on equal ground. No suspicion, no treating me like a project you're managing. We build something real, or we don't build at all." "I agree," Sebastian said without hesitation, "and I'm not asking for trust I haven't earned. Let me earn it every day." She studied his face, looking for cracks, for the faintest sign of performance. She found none. "Then we try," she said softly. Lila looked up, confused. "Try what?" "To make a family," Sebastian said, kneeling to her level. The little girl grinned, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to hear those words. She threw her arms around his neck, and in that moment, something shifted in the room, a sense of safety so real you could almost see it settle over them like a warm blanket. When they returned to the mansion the next day, Elara walked in not as a timid guest, but as someone stepping into her own home. The silver key was replaced with one of gold, and this time, Sebastian didn't just hand it to her, he placed it in Lila's small palm. "You're the keeper of this house now," he told her. The rooms that had once echoed with silence were soon filled with the sounds of life. Lila's laughter ricocheting off marble floors, the scent of Elara's cooking drifting from the kitchen, conversations that ran late into the night by the fireplace. Even the staff noticed the change. Sebastian smiled more, stayed home more, and when he left for business, he came back sooner. And Vivian Crown? She heard about the reunion through the same society channels that once paraded her beside Sebastian. The news stung, not because she loved him, but because she realized she had lost to something she could never compete with: genuine love and loyalty. For a woman like Vivian, that kind of defeat was worse than any financial loss. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Sebastian stood in the garden watching Elara and Lila plant flowers. Lila's hands were covered in dirt, and she was laughing, her small voice carrying across the lawn. Elara looked up at him, smiling in a way that reached her eyes, and in that moment, Sebastian understood that no business deal, no title, no fortune could compare to the wealth he had now. And here's my personal take, because if you've stayed with me this long, you deserve to know. Sometimes the strongest ending to a story isn't revenge on those who wronged you, but the peace you build in spite of them. Sebastian could have stayed the man who drove away kindness with doubt, but he chose to be the man who fought to bring it back. And Elara? She could have closed the door forever, but she didn't. She gave him and herself a second chance. That's the thing about keys. They're not just for locking people out. Sometimes they're for letting the right ones in and keeping them there.